The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsey, where wisdom meets business. Hello, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing great, Kristina. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm excited about our episode today, in which we are going to be talking about a principle and an axiom that you have used throughout your a practice that you've used for your entire life, which is worst, better, best, right?
Yes.
Indeed. And so before we get into it, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. This is Fred. Fred is a chaos strategist. He is the founder of Results Through Strategy, which has done restaurant consulting in all aspects, but he's also been an amazing mentor to CEOs and really been a beacon in the industry and beyond for how to incorporate consciousness into whether it's conscious capitalism or whether it's his involvement in other aspects of really trying to be the best possible leader and the best possible person. So welcome, Fred.
Oh, well, thank you. And likewise, let me introduce you, Kristina. Kristina is a life alchemist. So what does that really mean? That means that she helps one look at life from a different lens and also transmute sometimes what is negative energy into positive energy. That's the lead into gold that the famous alchemists have always done. It's really an inner work rather than an outer work. And today, what we're talking about is, Kristina talked about, is a practice that I've used called worst, better, best.
Yes.
So let me set the stage for that. Many times all of us are faced with a situation that occurs, and we've talked before about the universe is neutral. Just it is what it is. Something just occurs. It just occurs. There's no good or bad to it unless we put meaning to it. However, because this is how we operate as human beings, and we find a circumstance that occurs and immediately think the worst that could happen, there's a tendency to go on this dark road. Now, the thing that I've learned is if you explore this very carefully, you find out some real truths about these things that we imagine. This is like the boogeymen under the bed. You got to turn the light on, look under the bed, and realize there's nothing there. So inside our psyche, we go through this whole process. And so as an example, if you have a circumstance that occurs and you have a tendency to go to this dark place, let's spend the time in that dark place and really go for it. And so I'll sit down with someone and say, okay, I want you to really tell me what's the worst that could happen. You already think some catastrophes occurred. Well, let's really explore it. And I want you to really tell me what it's like. Are you going to lose your job? Are you going to lose your income? Are you going to lose your family? Are you going to get a divorce? Whatever. You're going to go bankrupt. Just go as dark and as deep as you possibly can and really explore it and really feel the emotion of being there. And so it's a kind of a scary place to be because you're like going down the 7 rings of hell, and there we are. And after we're done with that, and I can tell people, okay, can you really see this? You really imagine it? Say, oh, yeah, it's terrible. Okay. Here's the really critical question. Can you survive it? Can you survive it? And I've never had this conversation. I've had a lot where someone doesn't sit there and go, I'd rather not, but I can. I can. And I said, well, what would you do? And we can get into some of the specifics and say, well, if I lose my job, if I, lose my wife, if I da-da-da-da, whatever the horror story is, you begin to say that you can survive it. Unpleasant as hell, but you can survive it. Like I said, sometimes we got to crawl through the gravel on our belly before we get a chance to stand up. And that does happen in life. Life will knock you down, especially if you've been somewhat pompous. So now that someone can actually say, I can survive this, then my statement is great. Get rid of that fear because you already know that you can survive it. And what people need to realize is that whatever we fix on, sort of in our mind and emotionally, we will bring into our lives. So let's not do that. So now that you know that you can survive this, let's go to the next place, which is better. All right. Now, better is going to be the same topics. You may not lose your job. You may not lose your business. You may not lose your wife. You may not fall into horrible health, but there's going to be some lesser pain there. And one of the things I've always say is that pain's inevitable. Suffering is optional. So let's not hang on to the suffering part of it. Let's just deal with the pain and get it over as quickly as possible. And so when you go into better, and you begin to see sort of a different movie scene in your mind's eye that is not as bad as before. It's still challenging, still difficult. There's going to be some, not so great stuff in it. And then the question applies again is, can you survive this? Yeah. Well, compared to worse, oh yeah, of course I can. And okay, good. Now we can eliminate the fear there. Okay. Last one. What's the best that could happen? And really get into that emotion. The birds are singing, the sky is blue, you got $1 million in the bank, blah, 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 blah. Whatever that fantasy is going to be, make it as positive as possible within the context of what we're considering here, right? And you say, this is the best that could happen. And of course, the same question, can you survive that? Now, people look at me like I'm crazy. Well, what do you mean, how can I survive? It's the best that could happen. I said, well, a lot of people sabotage themselves at the last minute.
Yes.
So we got to find out, do you have any self-sabotage built into you? Because that may be why you're in the circumstance you're in.
Yep.
Okay. You are responsible for whatever condition you're in. You're not innocent of that. And it's an important part of the accountability. And so once you've got these three scenarios out, what I try to explain to them is you've already faced the fear of the worst and a little bit better, and you can eliminate that now. Now, if you start putting your energy toward the best that could happen, what's going to really occur 99% of the time is you're going to end up with better, or really the high end, the better. Worse is like this, better is wider, best is like this. And so you end up in the upper end of better, close to the best, because you're putting your energy, your attention, your emotion, your fixation on that. And
Yep.
that's what's going to occur. And you can live with it. All of them you can live with. And what I have found is that by doing that, when people finally accept the better circumstance that they had envisioned, is because they eliminated all the negativity, the worst, all the fear, all the doubt, all the self-criticism, all the waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the ceiling, going, what am I going to do now? And they've shown themselves that they're capable of overcoming those challenges. So that exercise, the worst, better, best, is a very, very powerful exercise to get yourself out of this rut. And actually doing what Kristina has done is change your view of what's going on in your life from a different lens, to find out that sometimes the things that happen to us are happening for us,
Yes.
to help us grow, to help us see that we're really stronger than we really are, and to move into a different dimension. So that's my explanation. So what's your reaction to that, Kristina?
Well, it's brilliant because I can't tell you how many times I've had people who I know who've talked to you and say, well, Fred took me through worse, better, best. It was like, mind blown. I totally feel so much better about this. And the thing that I love about that is that it really incorporates what I would kind of call this version of like multi-dimensional communication, if you want to call it that, right? This idea that like, when you are scenarioizing or trying to think of a possibility, like you can think about it, but it really helps to feel it and to like kind of immerse yourself in that experience as much as possible in order to be able to dissolve the fear that sits there. It's a practice that I do all the time with people. I don't necessarily do worse, better, best, but I think that it's very, for people who have a lot of anxiety and for people who are kind of constantly ferrying around these deep, huge fears in their life, and they don't recognize that they've ended up in a part of the river that they didn't even expect to, because they've just constantly had something, that they're steering around and they're afraid to go into it, is that some people can hit it kinesthetically, right? Like, so some people can recognize a fear and literally feel it in their body. And then I'm like, okay, so go into that fear. Don't go around it. You feel anxiety, you feel heart palpitations, go into that. What does that feel like? Right. And all of a sudden, if you kind of desire it, you're curious for it, you're really going into it, suddenly it disappears. Suddenly it's like, oh, you're not doing it with the goal of it just disappearing. You're doing it with the goal of looking for it. Right. And so that's a kinesthetic approach. Getting it so you're meditating or your eyes are closed and you're visualizing it. And then you're just like, this is how this would feel. Like this, I can feel how much anger or angst or whatever would be coming up. What you're doing is you're effectively, I would almost think of it as like, imagine that there's this like kite, right? So use the same boat analogy. It's like a sail and it's pulling you towards this reality all the time. By going into the feeling, you're getting up a little bit of slack so you can detach it and it no longer has to be a possibility in your life. Right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that exploration of really, looking under the bed with a flashlight to see the boogeyman is there is very, very powerful. Because we realize, quite frankly, that a lot of the circumstance we find ourselves in is because we created them. They're not necessarily a figment of our imagination. They are our imagination brought to life. And one of the things that I learned a long time ago is if I find myself at the bottom of a deep hole in, brackish water surrounded by flotsam, and I want to blame someone because I'm a victim and therefore I'm powerless to do anything about it. If instead I sit there at the bottom of the hole, surrounded by flotsam and just, brackish water, and I go, you know what? I got myself into this. Therefore, I can get myself out. That's the difference from being a victim to being a victor, to say, nope, I own it. I'm responsible for why I'm here. Therefore, I can change it. And this is part of that exercise, is to realize that if I put myself in a situation where I'm fearing the worst, is because somehow I contributed to that. None of us are innocent. We are all active participants in our reality. We create our reality, including the people we bring into our lives, both for good and for bad reasons, and the circumstances we find ourselves in. And this is a great exercise to try to see if you can get yourself out of your situation.
This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
Exactly. Can I tell you a funny story, Fred? This just happened today. Okay, so I was working with he's a CEO, and he is he always has a very, like, he's got a lot of stuff going on, all the time. He's very, very transparent about, like, these are the things that are going on in my business. These are the things that are going on in my life. And we look at the patterns, right? We look at the patterns and recognize that what's happening over here is happening over here is happening over here. And so last week I was like, oh, I heard something about fear. Like, I feel like fear is coming up a lot right now. Like, I kind of just got an inkling that we needed to do that. And I was like, this is a fun thing. Why don't we go into this? I say fun thing because, again, it's this matter of, like, if you take it with curiosity, suddenly it doesn't have the same weight. And he didn't do his homework. He always does his homework. He did not do his homework. I joke it's homework, but it's like he didn't do his assignment, right? I gave him a meditation. I was like, go look at your worst fears. Here are 2 fears that we know that you have. Go look at those. He didn't do it. He came onto the call today and he had a background, and never has a background. And then he tells me about his week, and then he gets to this point where he's finally like, I may have, like, totally blown up a relationship that I had. I was like, wait, so right after you talked to me last week and I told you to go deal with fears, you got hyper paranoid, went and destroyed a relationship, and now you have, like, a backdrop because it's not meant to be, like, you kind of want to, like, hide your location sort of thing. And I was like, do you see how instead of addressing the fear, you basically just traveled straight into the heart of it? Mm-hmm. And now you're sitting here and it's like, you can't see that it's anything other than that, right? And it's just so fascinating to me how it works like that, how we recognize that we treat them as abstractions or feelings or something like that, but they're spaces to me. They are spaces that exist that if we don't deal with them and face them, we can get pulled into them. And suddenly everything you do, and you don't understand why you're doing it, because it feels totally justified, because it's like you're the fish in the new water. You never even understood that it's like it could be anything other than that brackish water, right? And so, this week I was like, all right, dude, you're going to tell me this, but look at this, and this. Like, all these things happen, which to me indicate that you're trying to justify a state of fear that you want to stay in. And you're going to say, this is a good thing. Like, I'm going to double down on my fear. Right. And you're like, wow, you have a lot of allegiance to this fear. Like, isn't that amazing? Because fear is often a strategy. Wonderful. It often helps us. Right.
Yeah. No, what you're talking about is that when I said earlier that a lot of us are wired to immediately imagine the worst, we're addicted to that feeling. And that's the problem. Now, that could be as a result of your upbringing, societal norms. There's a lot of reasons why, but at no point should one feel powerless. However, one of the things you said earlier really struck me is you approach fear with curiosity, not with more fear. You approach it to say, what is it that I'm really scared of? Why does this scare me? What could happen as a result of investing more into this condition, this frame of mind? As I already said, it's just the worst that could happen. That's why you really want to go down deep and get ugly, to just, because you go, oh my God, that's just so dark. But we're there. And exploring it with curiosity, to use your term, is what eliminates it. And especially when you empower yourself, I can survive it. I can get through this. I don't want to, but I can get through it. And once you realize you have the power to change the situation without having to go through all that dark stuff, and you can accept something that you can really live with, which is always going to be on the upper scale of better, that's great. And every once in a while you win the lotto and you get the best. Okay, that's going to happen, but it's not going to happen automatically. The good news is that if you start from ground zero, not from being a reaction to a negative circumstance that you've applied as negative, but just to say what you've always told me, the universe is neutral. Something just occurred without judgment. But whatever just occurred, I begin to see the kernels of something really fantastic come out of it. And I start putting my energy toward that. That's how you're going to get the best. And that's a beautiful thing. The other thing, which is unbelievably awesome having gone through it, is it takes all this emotion out of this up and down roller coaster and this anguish and, oh my God, what am I going to, that's all gone. It's just, you're just in a really good place, centered, able to respond, aware of what the circumstances are, and know that you can deal with it with equanimity.
Exactly. Because I know it sounds like a strange thing to say, but I think we vastly underestimate how much we sometimes feel like somebody's out to get us, like the universe or something is like, oh, well, but why did it all go wrong? I don't understand it. And it's a way to deflect responsibility from the experience that you're having. And it's like, no, this is the ups and downs of life. This is how we recognize that life is all here. And it's like, it's kind of like I say, and that many people have said throughout time, any kind of people who are in a spiritual mind is, if the universe is love or if the universe is neutral, it's always reaching out to kind of try and be like, hey, this is in the way. You're not fully loving yourself, whether you want to say it's yourself or allowing the love that comes in from everywhere, to be able to actually come in. There's this thing that's blocking it. So we're going to like light this thing up, because this is a boulder that's in your field and it needs to move if you want to have the free flow of life to actually come through you again. And fear is some of the biggest boulders we have in our fields.
Yep, exactly. And sometimes it's not what we don't know that hurts, it's what we believe to be true that's hurting us. And so when you are grateful for the things that happen to you that you think are good, you need to be equally grateful for the things that happen to you that ultimately you think are bad, because they're neither. They're just things that occur. And we have an opportunity at all times in being in control of our lives to just accept them as it is and respond accordingly.
Yep. Absolutely. So wonderful practice, Fred. Thank you so much for sharing and for giving us that practice. So to encourage everybody to do that in their own life, just even if it's an assessment to say, what is the thing that I'm actually inherently and subconsciously letting rule? What is the fear that I'm always trying to move around? Can I face that fear and all of a sudden see things in my life shift and change and go for better?
Fantastic. All right, Kristina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred.
The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsey, where wisdom meets business.